Welcome to This Got Me Thinking, where clarity comes from conversations and the connections that spark from them. I am your host, Chris LaFay, and today I had the pleasure of chatting with Logan Lyles. When most people lose their job, their instinct is to scramble for stability. But Logan did something completely different. He took that uncertainty and turned it into motion. And within weeks, he built a flywheel that merged marketing, collaboration, and content creation, all designed to feed itself over time. This isn't a startup story about fear like a lot of them are. It's actually about building systems that turn chaos into momentum. I'll let Logan tell his story. Tell me a little bit about the shift in where your brain was to finally, I'm using the word finally. I don't know if finally is appropriate or not, but wanting to actually like go out and step on your own. What was that moment like?
Yeah, for me, kind of this winding journey from sales into partnerships and marketing, and it was 22 to 23 and 24. I was in-house at teamwork.com, and I wanted to leverage my sales skills and the marketing that I've been doing into a marketing role. But I was like, well, marketers don't quite get paid like salespeople, right? And so I was kind of dealing with
Right.
some of those realities of like, hey, I can add a ton of value, but I feel like I'm adding even more value than I was over here. And I understand why marketers aren't compensated the same way. We don't have the same quotas, all of that sort of stuff. And so I was
Totally.
like, but I mean, if I were doing this sort of work and it's highly valuable to folks who want to work with me and see value in how I can help them with their marketing, so I started to parlay that into some consulting and some work for one-off clients on the side outside of my day job. But I didn't feel like I was at a point, personally, financially, career-wise, to just fully, make the leap. Um, Fast forward a few years later, this summer, I actually got let go for the first time ever. And my wife, it was funny, like a week before that happened, my wife was like, you're kind of like the model employee. Like, it seems like to truly be an entrepreneur, like they're almost unemployable. And that's not you. Like you were the straight A student, you're the model employee. Yes,
Uh-huh.
you kind of have these aspirations and you could add value and you can sell. And then when that happened, we both kind of looked at each other and was like, well, I guess now I've got free license to actually do it. So that's not the reason, but that's a story that I tell that it was kind of funny timing around that conversation.
What was that first month or so like for you? So you lose your job. I hope you would you had a little bit of buffer time built in, maybe with some severance or something like that. But like how did you basically go from side hustle doing some like small little things over here to like full blown at 100 miles an hour?
I mean, the thing that gave me confidence is that I knew how to sell. I had been in B2B sales for 10 years before I kind of moved over into the marketing side and had a few different roles. So that gave me a little bit of confidence because when that happened, I looked at my two options of I can go try and get another job, or I can try and get 5 to 7 clients based on what I thought I would package up as my offer, how I would sell it, what my retainer would be. And to me, the path to find that handful of clients, I was like, I have more confidence that I could do that more reliably and more quickly than finding a new job. Because I mean, they typically say that like if you are gonna find a new job, I forget like the math on it, but like if you take the annual salary and divide it by 10, that's how many months it's going to take you to find a job at that pay level. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I've kind of seen that. And like the general premise is true, right? If you're at this stage in your career, I'd already been a VP, I'm making 6 figures. We're a single income household with 2 kids. And so that to me, part of it was just like, hey, I think this is actually more realistic. And so that was the first kind of decision point. The second was, okay, well, how am I going to find these clients? Like we were talking about earlier, where could I find where the wind was at my back a little bit? And my first place was LinkedIn. Since like 2017, 2018, I've been active on that platform, oftentimes posting daily, growing my network, growing my connections. And I've got about 20,000 connections / followers on LinkedIn today. Now, unfortunately, today with the way LinkedIn's organic algorithm is playing out, as we've joked about in the agency community that we're both a part of, right? It's going down and down, and we laugh about it. But I actually have, but if you have a large degree of connections, that means their DMs are open. And the other thing that LinkedIn that is something you can take advantage of, like right now, is starting a new position on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's algorithm loves those posts. So I was like, okay, I already have an idea of. Thankfully, I already had a name for the business, had a domain picked out, had some of those things in place because I had been thinking about it for the long term. But I spun up a LinkedIn company page. I did a starting a new position post, and I said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." And I actually generated one new client literally off of that post. So that was one thing that I did was I looked at, okay, I'm not just gonna start posting on LinkedIn randomly. I'm gonna look at what sorts of things actually create a buzz and a splash, and try and do that. So I very strategically, the very first Monday morning, when I launched, was I put thought and effort into that quote unquote starting a new position post and use that to launch
Yeah.
the business. The other thing that I did was I didn't want to hit up everybody in my network and say, "Hey, do you want to buy my service?" So I kind of went in concentric circles. So I went to the folks that I knew really, really well. And those were calls and text messages. "Hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm doing. I'm not asking you to buy from me. I just want to let you know here's what I'm doing, so that if you come across someone who is a good fit, you could easily refer me." I'm trying to make it easy for them to think of me and help me. And now those were just with people that I was close with. I could make a request of them pretty easily because I've deposited in that relationship. And then
Yeah.
further out, I looked at, well, I have these 20,000 connections on LinkedIn. And I went to market with webinars as a service as my packaged offering for B2B brands. And so I looked at all my connections, all of those that were in marketing, and I started doing outreach to them specifically. And I spun up a Typeform survey that asked like 25 to 30 questions about, hey, if you're running webinars, or if you're not, why are you? Why aren't you? What's working? What's not? And at the end of that survey, there was a question of, hey, do you want to book a call with a team that specializes in helping B2B brands with their webinar programs? So one, it was a way
Mhm.
for me to do outreach, let people know what I was doing. It's a way for me to collect data on my audience and what they're struggling with so that I can tailor my service and my content to serve them better. I now have 250 responses to that survey. It's actually going to be put out in an industry report, and it opened the door for sales conversations. So you and I talking about where can you find one input and get two, three, four outputs? This was
Yeah.
exactly that.
So going back to where you were deciding, like, how to find these handful of clients, right? You chose webinars as the service that you wanted to offer. Before you honed in on that decision, were there multiple types of services that you were considering, and what made you land on webinars as the thing you wanted to be the guy in?
So it was a few things. So answer to part of your question of like, did I tinker with some other services? Yes. Actually, before I jumped into full-time entrepreneurship, I was basically doing a LinkedIn ghostwriting and content creation service for some founders, where I would hop on to Riverside, like we're recording this podcast,
Yeah.
and do a monthly call with my client, maybe 30, 45 minutes, give them some questions, give them some prompts, and then just take their responses and turn that into LinkedIn posts, video clips for YouTube and LinkedIn and that sort of stuff. And part of the reason I did that is, hey, I could say, hey, I've grown my LinkedIn following to 20,000. I've created content on LinkedIn for years. Also, at that point, I had hosted 600 podcast episodes. So I could say, hey, I'm a pretty good interviewer. I can interview you and take the content creation barrier out of your way so that you can just hop on, answer questions, and then boom, you've got a month's worth of LinkedIn content. So I
Yeah.
ran that for a few clients. At the same time, the job that I was let go of, I was running sales and marketing for an agency, and for a number of reasons that don't necessarily pertain to this, why we started doing it, but we started running a webinar series, and we saw some good results early on. Actually, in my previous role, I had run a podcast and webinar at teamwork.com, kind of under the same banner called Agency Life, where we did a monthly webinar and a weekly to bi-weekly podcast. So I was getting some more experience. Like I said, I had a lot of podcast experience. I was gaining more webinar experience. But then I started seeing this problem with webinars where I was getting people attending our series, coming again, getting tons of feedback, but it wasn't converting to booked sales calls. And I updated our funnel. We can talk about some of the logistics if some of that is interesting to the audience, but suffice it to say, I kind of reworked my approach to webinars, and it led to a 5x increase on my conversion from webinar signups to booked sales calls. And so I was like, ooh, if you're starting a new business, one of the biggest challenges is you don't have a whole lot of social proof to point to get these first few clients. Now, when I launched Demand Shift, I didn't have any clients I could point to, but I knew that I could say, hey, for 3 years, I ran webinars across 2 different companies. There were some successes, there were some failures, but there was this big unlock, and there's a very visible metric I can point to in the outcome that I generated for myself. I think I can do that for you too. So that gave me some early social proof to go to market with something that I knew well, that I had been honing, and I had the social proof that I could take to market early.
One of the things that I didn't hear inside of your story, which shocks me, is very little fear in this like decision-making process, but also kind of this initial path you've been down for since the summertime, effectively. Has there been any of that that's fostered up? Not that I'm trying to not that I ask you this question, not to be like, hey, you should have been afraid of this whole thing. That's not my point. It's just so uncommon with the founders that I talk to. And so I'm curious, was there any of that either during that pivoting process or kind of during this like trial and error process that you went through for a little while?
Either I fake it really well, or I'm just at a good spot now that I don't remember it so well, so it's not coming across. It's one of those 2 things, or a mixture of both, Chris, because there absolutely was fear. And I told my wife in the first couple of weeks and even days right after I told her, I'm like, I feel like I'm a pendulum swinging from so hopeful and encouraged to
Mhm.
deathly afraid. And it was probably a couple months in, maybe 2.5 months in, I said, you know what? That pendulum is not swinging as often or as far anymore.
Interesting.
And so, and then it's been seasonal. One of the things that lines from that podcast that I mentioned that I hosted for a few years called Agency Life, as we always called it, this crazy roller coaster ride that we call Agency Life. And there are ups and downs. My first, I typically do quarterly commitments with my clients. So that kind of first renewal cycle of, okay, I've got my first clients who are coming up for renewal, and okay, this one extended and is super happy. This one we're driving results for, but we're actually not extending. I didn't see that coming. Okay, now I've got some churn I wasn't necessarily accounting for early. So I mean, there's always that stress, and as a solopreneur in a service-based business, there is always going to be that balance of serving clients well, which we've been talking about here, but also your churn is never going to be 0. Your client retention is never going to be forever. And so there is always going to be this not problem to be solved, but this tension to be managed between new business development and client management and delivery, especially if you're solo. The thing that I noticed about myself is that I actually like both. I could get bored just selling and wanting to like go further with clients and help them achieve it. But if I'm just working in it, it can kind of feel like, I need that like energy you get from a new client saying yes, or that new energy you get from seeing that call booked on your calendar, or getting that warm referral of like, "Ooh, this is going to be fun." And so for me, it's also I have to remind myself that I get to do both.
The question I want to look at today is, where are there missing potential collaborations? One of the coolest parts about Logan's business that he was able to create is this flywheel that just connects within itself. He can create his own content and do his own webinars for his own business, which obviously will then help bring in clients to his business. And then by having more people that are in his network, he also is then able to utilize his network for his clients as well too. So it's this flywheel that just keeps moving, and the more content that he can create and the more people that he can get to join in on what he's up to feeds both sides of the business, both his client success, but also his business development and lead gen as well. And so my core piece and my core takeaway here is, are there areas of potential collaboration with other companies that are either in alignment with you? Maybe they do larger projects, you do smaller, or vice versa, or are in adjacent lanes to where you guys don't actually work on the same stuff, but you do kind of run in parallel. What collaborations can you create that provides value for both you and the collaborator, but then allows you to both kind of attack each other's audiences as well too? And so that's the challenge to really think through today, is where are those? Because a solid part of any company's outreach strategy and getting in new clients is having a very active partner network. So how do you go about creating that? And there's so many different ways to do it. And there's a lot of unique ways to do it, ways to just provide value and to honestly have a fun time. Like something that I was considering, I know a guy that runs a popsicle company. We can do custom labels and things like that. So it's like, how could we go throughout Atlanta and hand out popsicles with a handful of brands that are on them and provide, a nice summertime treat effectively, and collaborate amongst a handful of agencies to do that and provide joy to folks inside the city. And, maybe that doesn't hit our ICPs necessarily, but it creates new story to be told. So it doesn't just have to be these co-branded webinars and co-branded email pitches and things like that, but thinking outside the box to where you can mutually create stories and connection with one another. That's what Logan got me thinking.